In the quiet Buttonwoods neighborhood of Warwick, Rhode Island, residents knew everyone by name and watched the neighborhood kids grow up, borrowing tools from one another, never imagining that a monster was hiding right there in their own backyard. But on the night of July 27th, 1987, that peaceful illusion was shattered forever. Barely a teenager, he slipped inside the home of 27-year-old Rebecca Spencer, grabbed a kitchen knife, and stabbed her 58 times. She died alone in her home, just 2 houses away from where the young killer lived with his family. The crime scene absolutely horrified investigators. The level of violence was extreme, deeply personal, and brutal. Yet, despite extensive searches, detectives found no viable suspects. The case went cold, tucked away in filing cabinets, while the community tried to move on. But he was not finished. The evil inside was only dormant, waiting. 2 years later, on the night of September 1st, 1989, he struck again. By this time, he was 15, a high school freshman living a completely normal teenage life on the surface. But that night, he consumed substances that completely stripped away whatever thin layer of restraint he still possessed. He targeted the Heaton family, who lived nearby on Metropolitan Drive. 39-year-old Joan Heaton was home with her daughters, 10-year-old Jennifer and 8-year-old Melissa, when he entered through an unlocked window. What followed next would become one of the most horrific family annihilations in Rhode Island history. Joan Heaton was stabbed 57 times, while her daughter Jennifer suffered 62 stab wounds. Little Melissa was not only stabbed 30 times, but her skull was crushed with a kitchen stool. The violence was so savage that the knives broke at the handles, remaining embedded inside their bodies. When Joan's mother, Marie Bouchard, arrived at the house on September 4th, after not hearing from her daughter over the holiday weekend, she and her other daughter, Mary Lou, discovered the unthinkable. Blood splattered the entire home. A putrid smell hung in the air. The scene was beyond comprehension, prompting police to launch an intensive investigation. The similarities between this crime and Rebecca Spencer's unsolved death 2 years earlier were completely unmistakable. Soon, the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the case, profiling the killer as a local who knew the neighborhood intimately. Then, investigators got their big breakthrough. They noticed that whoever committed the Heaton murders had likely injured themselves during the savage attack. When detectives Ray Pendergast and Mark Brandreth canvassed the area on September 5th, just a day after the discovery, they interviewed Craig Price. The teenage boy had a fresh cut on his hand. He offered a quick excuse, claiming he had cut himself while drunk and vandalizing a car. But detectives remained skeptical and requested a search warrant. Inside his family home, they discovered bloody knives and stained clothing. The evidence was absolutely overwhelming. On September 17th, 1989, with his mother present, he was interrogated at the Warwick police station, and then, calmly, showing absolutely no remorse, he confessed to murdering the entire Heaton family. He detailed entering their home to steal a VCR, encountering Joan when she woke up, and then slaughtering everyone inside. He even coldly mimicked the final sounds of the young girls he had stabbed. Under further questioning, he confessed to Rebecca Spencer's murder too. But as we will see, the story takes an infuriating turn. Craig Price was arrested on September 16th, just 1 month shy of his 16th birthday. Under Rhode Island law at the time, anyone under 16 who committed a crime, no matter how brutal, had to be tried as a juvenile, meaning they could only be held until their 21st birthday. And he knew this. During his confession, he actually bragged that he would be released at 21 and make history. He understood that the legal system could not keep him locked up past that date. For killing 4 people, he faced a maximum of 5 years in detention. Public outrage was instant and fierce, leaving the victims' families completely devastated. The community felt deeply betrayed by a justice system that seemed entirely powerless to deliver appropriate consequences. A grassroots organization called Citizens Opposed to the release of Craig Price, known as CORP, formed almost overnight, led by Captain Kevin Collins, who supervised the Heaton investigation, and Joan's mother, Marie Bouchard. The group organized protests, hiring airplanes to fly warning banners across major cities, alerting citizens that a serial killer could move nearby, while lobbying relentlessly for legislative change. The case soon drew national attention. Even President Bill Clinton spoke out during a visit to Rhode Island, demanding changes to the law. Rhode Island lawmakers quickly responded, passing new legislation allowing violent juveniles to be tried in adult court. But the law couldn't be applied retroactively. Price had beaten the system, or so it seemed. Law enforcement and prosecutors refused to back down. They began building a new strategy. Keep Price locked up by prosecuting crimes he committed while behind bars. In late 1993, while detained at the Rhode Island training school, Price threatened a guard who caught him smuggling cigarettes. He wasn't used to accountability, and this threat became the first domino. In 1994, he was convicted of extortion and assault. He received a 15-year sentence with 7 years to serve. Next, the Attorney General filed criminal contempt charges because Price refused a mandatory psychiatric program. A jury convicted him, adding 25 years to his sentence with 10 to serve. But Price kept acting out. He fought guards in 1996, stomped an officer in 1998, and attacked an inmate in 2001. Every single outbreak added more time to his sentence. By 2004, his extreme violence forced Rhode Island officials to transfer him to Florida, where he would serve his time far from the state he terrorized. Yet, even in Florida, the violence didn't stop. In July 2009, Price got into a brutal prison fight with another inmate. As guards rushed to break it up, one officer was stabbed in the finger by Price's homemade weapon. Then, in April 2017, he was accused of stabbing fellow inmate Joshua Davis at a Florida prison with a 5-inch homemade knife. In 2019, Price was convicted of that stabbing and handed another 25 years. The parole board denied him in March 2009, and repeated denials have pushed his release date far into the future. Rhode Island prosecutors also filed probation violations tied directly to his new crimes in Florida, making sure that even if he finishes his Florida sentence, he goes straight back to Rhode Island for more prison time. Today, Craig Price remains behind bars, now in his 50s. He is known as America's youngest serial killer, a terrifying title that carries heavy weight. The complex legal efforts that kept him locked up after his teenage sentence ended became a famous case study, showing how a determined legal system can adapt, all to protect the public from a remorseless predator. The victims' families never got true closure, but they proved that delayed justice is not denied justice. Price's dark legacy changed Rhode Island law forever, altering how the state handles violent juvenile offenders. But for the families of Rebecca Spencer, Joan Heaton, Jennifer Heaton, and Melissa Heaton, no new laws can ever undo the horror that took place in those quiet Warwick homes. And as we will soon see, Price wasn't the only one whose crimes forced Rhode Island to face the darkness. Our next case, Esteban Carpio. Some crimes happen in an instant, a split-second choice that shatters lives forever. On April 16, 2005, Providence, Rhode Island, was about to witness one of the most shocking crimes in its history. Esteban Carpio, a 26-year-old with a deeply troubled past and a record of petty offenses, was about to commit an act so brazen and unthinkable it would send shockwaves through the entire law enforcement community. It began in the early afternoon when Carpio, driving a red van, approached 84-year-old Madeline Gatta as she stood outside her home on Swift Street. Clad in black, with a scarf and hat hiding his face, Carpio tried to rob her. When she screamed, he struck her hard in the back, sending her to the ground. She felt a sharp pain, later identified as stab wounds. Carpio fled on foot, then escaped in the van. But an alert neighbor noted the vehicle's license plate number before he could disappear. Officers responded quickly, tracing the van back to Carpio and bringing him to police headquarters for questioning. He was led up to a third-floor interview room, where Detective Sergeant James Allen, a 50-year-old veteran with 27 years of service, began questioning him. Detective Allen was married, a father of 2, and deeply respected by his fellow officers. He was known for his professionalism, his absolute calm under pressure, and his deep dedication to the community. That afternoon, he was doing what he had done hundreds of times before questioning a suspect in a violent crime. During the interrogation, a second detective stepped out of the room to get Carpio some water. It was just a routine moment, a quick absence that should have meant nothing. But within seconds, everything changed. Carpio and Detective Allen were left entirely alone. What happened next can only be pieced together from grim physical evidence and responding officers. A brutal struggle erupted. Carpio managed to disarm Allen, wrenching the service weapon directly from his holster. Without hesitation, Carpio fired multiple shots into Allen's back and face at point-blank range, sending gunfire echoing through the entire building. Hearing the gunfire from the floor below, officers tried desperately to reach Detective Allen over the radio. Only silence. They rushed toward the third-floor conference room as more gunshots rang out ahead of them. After 3 tries, they smashed the door open with a battering ram, only to find a scene of absolute horror. Detective Allen lay dying on the floor. Carpio had already vanished. The room was in total chaos, with spent casings scattered and blood pooling. Only after searching an adjoining office did officers discover how Carpio escaped. He had shot out a window and plunged from the 3rd floor, triggering an immediate and massive manhunt. Battered from the drop, Carpio was tracked down 45 minutes later, following a brief foot chase. When officers finally cornered him, he fought back viciously. Rhode Island State Police Detective Christopher Zarella later testified that he punched Carpio 3 times in the face to subdue him, fracturing facial bones. The damage was graphic and impossible to ignore. Carpio was so bruised and swollen he was barely recognizable. Paramedics rushed Detective Allen to Rhode Island Hospital, but his wounds were simply too catastrophic. He was pronounced dead at 12:29 in the morning, April 17, 2005. A dedicated husband, father, and veteran officer who spent his life protecting others was gone, leaving the Providence Police Department devastated. The entire state fell into mourning. The next day, April 18th, Carpio appeared in Providence District Court to face first-degree charges for killing Detective Allen. But what grabbed national headlines was not just the crime, it was Carpio's physical appearance. Because his facial injuries were so severe, he had to wear a thick plastic mask in court, both to stop him from spitting and to hide his battered face. Photos of the killer in that mask quickly flashed across TV screens nationwide, sparking an intense public debate over police use of force. Providence Police Chief Dean Esserman maintained that the injuries came from his jump from the window. However, Detective Zarella's admission about striking Carpio during the arrest complicated that official story. An official FBI investigation eventually concluded that police did not use excessive force, but the court of public opinion remained deeply divided. Some argued that a man who had just brutally executed a police officer deserved absolutely no sympathy. Others questioned the severity of his injuries and whether proper arrest protocols were actually followed. On December 9, 2005, a grand jury indicted Carpio on 200 counts of manslaughter, 100 for criminal negligence, and 100 for committing a fatal crime of violence. They also charged him with stabbing Malene Gatta. In response, Carpio's defense team prepared an insanity defense, claiming that he suffered from chronic mental illness and drug-induced psychosis, making him unable to comprehend the wrongfulness of his actions. The trial finally began in June 2006. Prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence, including ballistics matching Allen's gun and blood spatter, proving how the shots were fired, Carpio's own fingerprints on the weapon, and testimony from Detective Stephen McCann, who heard Allen's cries. The state argued his actions showed cold calculation, not mental breakdown. They pointed to his earlier stabbing of Malene Gatta as proof of his criminal intent, his sudden attack on Allen, and his calculated attempt to escape the police. In the state's view, this was not a man who failed to understand right from wrong. The defense fought back with psychiatric evaluations, showing Carpio had a long history of mental health issues and drug addiction. They argued he simply lacked the capacity to form the intent needed for a first-degree conviction. But on June 27, 2006, the jury rejected the insanity plea, finding Carpio guilty on all counts, including the first-degree charge of taking a police officer's life, for firing a weapon during a violent crime and assaulting Malene Gatta. On October 10, 2006, Carpio received life in prison without parole for killing Detective Allen, along with a second consecutive life term for the fatal shooting, plus another consecutive 20 years for his vicious attack on the elderly woman. He would never taste freedom again. Carpio fought the verdict with multiple appeals. In 2012, the Rhode Island Supreme Court rejected his bid, ruling that his lawyers had made a conscious choice to skip a new trial, and the court acted properly. By 2017, he petitioned federal court, claiming the jury got it wrong because his mental illness cleared him of criminal responsibility. U.S. District Judge John McConnell Jr. dismissed the case in 2017, throwing out Carpio's arguments. Every appeal since then has been rejected. Today, Carpio is locked up at McDougall Walker Correctional Institution in Connecticut, moved out of Rhode Island over safety concerns. The Esteban Carpio case remains one of the most devastating tragedies in Providence police history. It exposed massive gaps in police interrogation methods and started a national conversation on officer safety during suspect interviews. In response to the tragedy, the Providence Police Department rewrote their playbook, ensuring that detectives are never left alone with high-risk suspects during questioning. For Detective James Allen's family, no court ruling, no sentence, no legal resolution could ever bring back their loved one. Yet justice, however flawed, was delivered. Carpio will rot in prison for life, a direct result of the choice he made on that third floor on April 16, 2005. But as the state mourned this senseless crime, another local family was about to vanish under even more terrifying circumstances. Case 3. Christopher Hightower. He was the exact kind of man people trusted. Christopher Hightower was a 42-year-old commodities broker residing in wealthy Binghamton, Rhode Island. To his neighbors, he seemed like a pillar of society, a Sunday school teacher and youth soccer coach, a warm face at local events. Parents trusted him completely with their kids. Church members absorbed his weekly lessons on faith. Outwardly, his life looked stable, highly respectable, and even admirable. But beneath that polished facade, his world was rotting. And when it finally cracked, Hightower wouldn't just self-destruct. He would drag 3 innocent people down. By September 1991, his world was collapsing. His wife, Susan, wanted a divorce. During one explosive fight, he made a terrifying threat. He claimed he paid $5,000 to have her killed, plus another $1,000 to make it look accidental. He also threatened her parents and sister, warning that hitmen were targeting them too if they tried to take custody of the couple's 2 children. Terrified, Susan begged the Rhode Island family court for a restraining order to kick him out of her parents' home where they lived. The once admired neighborhood figure was now a man completely unraveling, his threats growing darker. At the same time, Hightower faced professional ruin. Ernest Brendel, a 53-year-old self-employed patent attorney, filed formal complaints against Hightower with the National Futures Association and the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. Brendel, who was once a close friend and client of Hightower, accused him of mismanaging a $12,000 currency investment and making false statements. The official complaint demanded that Hightower lose his trading advisor license. If successful, his career was dead. With his finances already ruined, losing that license meant total destruction. He simply couldn't let that happen. On September 19, 1991, Hightower went to a sporting goods store and bought a Bear Devastator crossbow, 6 arrows, and 6 bullet point tips. It was a weapon meant to bring down a bear. The next day, September 20th, he launched his horrific plan. Alice Brendel, Ernest's 49-year-old wife and a trusted librarian at Brown University, was last seen that Friday evening taking the bus home from Providence. She arrived at their home on Middle in Binghamton, where she lived with Ernest and their 8-year-old daughter, Emily, a bright 3rd grader at Primrose Hill Elementary School. What happened next would haunt the area for decades. Hightower entered the property, likely through the garage, and waited. When Ernest arrived, Hightower ambushed him, firing 5 steel-tipped arrows with a deadly crossbow. One of those arrows tore through his heart, killing him almost instantly. Alice, drugged and fast asleep, was strangled to death with her own scarf. And 8-year-old Emily, an innocent child whose only mistake was being in the wrong place at the wrong time, was forced to swallow a lethal overdose of sleeping pills. Then, she was buried alive in a shallow grave. The sheer cruelty of the act was beyond comprehension. With the horrific deeds done, Christopher Hightower began covering his tracks. Driving the Brendel family's blood-soaked car, which still contained Ernest Brendel's teeth, he used their computer to forge documents. On September 22nd, he printed a letter on Ernest Brendel's official letterhead. It pretended to be from Ernest himself, withdrawing his complaint with the National Futures Association, and was immediately mailed to the agency. He also forged a $1,500 check from the Brendels' joint account to himself, before launching a brazen plan to extort even more money. On the night of September 22nd, Hightower drove to Guilford, Connecticut, and showed up at the home of Ernest Brendel's sister, Christine Scriabine. He spun a completely fabricated story. He claimed the Brendels had been kidnapped and that he needed $75,000 for their ransom. But Christine, highly suspicious of his strange behavior and his inconsistent story, refused to pay and immediately called the FBI. Within hours, law enforcement was hot on Hightower's trail. On September 23rd, police officers spotted him driving the Brendels' blood-stained vehicle. Inside, they found a crossbow, a shotgun, and Ernest Brendel's teeth. Hightower was quickly arrested on weapons, theft, and extortion charges. But a chilling question remained. Where were the Brendels? That question haunted investigators and the entire community for 7 agonizing weeks as search teams scoured the area. Volunteers combed through dense woods near the Brendel home, while bloodhounds tracked scents through fields and forests. Yet the family was nowhere to be found. Behind bars, Hightower flatly refused to cooperate. At one point, Sergeant John Lazaro of the Barrington Police told Hightower he was leaving to check tire tracks near his home. Hightower's response was chilling. "Sarge, you're wasting your time. They are not buried there." It was an admission of knowledge only a guilty man would possess. Finally, on November 7th, 1991, a woman named Catherine McCloy was walking her dogs near St. Andrew's School off Middle Highway in Barrington, less than half a mile from the Brendel home. One of her dogs bolted into the bushes and refused to return when called. Following her dog, McCloy found it sniffing 2 depressions in the dirt near some white powder. With her gardening background, she immediately recognized it as lime. She called the police, and later that afternoon, investigators excavated the site. There, they discovered the bodies of Ernest, Alice, and Emily Brendel, buried in shallow, lime-lined graves. The news shattered the community. Rhode Island Attorney General James O'Neill, visibly shaken, addressed the media. "Our hearts and souls reach out to the relatives of the Brendel family and the people of this community." He added, "The tragedy united the state in grief, but it also ignited rage. How could someone so trusted, so integrated into the fabric of the community, commit such monstrous acts?" On November 19th, 1991, Christopher Hightower was arraigned in Providence District Court. He appeared in shackles, facing 3 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Ernest, Alice, and Emily Brendel, along with kidnapping for taking Emily from a YMCA daycare center. Further charges included burglary, forgery, and unlawful burial. He was ordered held without bail. The trial began in March 1993. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence: the crossbow purchase, the forged documents, the stolen car, and the attempted extortion, and Hightower's own incriminating statements to the police. His former father-in-law, Clyde Slicker, testified that Hightower stayed out all night on September 19th, returning home around 11 a.m. on September 20th, wet and covered in mud. His eyeglasses were bent, his legs scraped. He immediately showered and put his muddy clothes in the wash, asking Slicker to add bleach the first time Slicker had ever seen him do laundry. Susan Hightower, his ex-wife, testified about the death threats he had made against her just days before the Brendels vanished. The jury listened as prosecutors detailed how Hightower's personal and professional life had completely unraveled. He was facing financial ruin, losing his license, and Ernest Brendel's complaint was about to end his entire career. The defense offered no real counter-narrative. The evidence was simply insurmountable. On April 7, 1993, the jury found Christopher Hightower guilty on all 11 counts. On June 8, 1993, Superior Court Judge John Sheehan handed him 3 consecutive life sentences. Hightower received life without parole for the murders of Ernest and Emily Brendel, and a 3rd life term for Alice Brendel. Judge Sheehan described the acts as the most sickening evil he had ever encountered. Since the sentences were ordered to run consecutively, Hightower would never taste freedom again. He also received at least 5 years on each remaining charge, which included breaking and entering an illegal burial. In 1993, officials transferred Hightower out of Rhode Island to another state. due to safety concerns and his extreme notoriety. He remains behind bars today. Decades later, a man whose fall from grace was as total as it was horrifying. The Brendel murders shattered how Rhode Island viewed safety, trust, and the fact that evil can hide behind a Sunday school teacher's smile. But as we look past Hightower's cold, calculated crimes, another tragedy was about to unfold that would devastate a whole community in minutes. Next, we look at Jeffrey and Michael Darien. It was supposed to be a night of music, laughter, and escape. On the evening of February 20th, 2003, the Station Nightclub in West Warwick, Rhode Island, was packed with excited fans waiting to see the rock band Great White perform. The club, a single-story wooden building of about 4,484 square feet, had been a local fixture for years. First built as a tavern in 1946, it served as a restaurant and pub before becoming a nightclub in the early 1990s. In March 2000, brothers Jeffrey and Michael Darien bought the place, renaming it the Station and keeping it as a live music venue. Over 440 people packed inside, far exceeding its official limit of 44. Still, the crowd's energy was electric. Vans packed tightly near the stage, drinks in hand, waiting for the show. Just after 11 p.m., Great White stepped into the spotlight. The first notes rang out. Then, in a heartbeat, everything was shattered. Daniel Bia, the tour manager, sparked 4 large pyrotechnics called gerbs as part of the band's opening visual display. Hot sparks shot upward, igniting the polyurethane foam insulation that covered the walls and ceiling around the stage. The foam, installed by the Darien brothers to muffle sound and stop noise complaints, was a highly flammable trap. In seconds, flames tore across the ceiling above the dance floor. Black smoke became visible in the exit doorways in just over a minute. At first, many in the crowd assumed the flames were just special effects. They stood still, not reacting. By the time pure panic set in, things were already catastrophic. The club had 4 exits, starting with the front doors. A door next to the stage on the west end, another near the bar on the east side, and an exit through the kitchen. But the massive crowd instinctively rushed for the main entrance, the very door they came in. It was a narrow hallway blocked by a single inner door, and as hundreds of desperate people hit that space at once, a deadly bottleneck crushed them together. People screamed, smoke thickened, bringing visibility to absolute zero within 90 seconds. Flames tore through the roof in under 5 minutes, leaving those trapped inside with almost no time to get out. Jeffrey Darien, who was working the bar, grabbed an extinguisher and ran toward the stage with a fellow employee. "We tried to get as far as we could," he later said. "We couldn't make it. The heat was too intense, the smoke too thick." Outside, survivor Linda Saran described the chaos as a riptide, a massive surge of bodies pushing for the door. A Providence Journal investigation later revealed that people had only 102 seconds to escape before it became unsurvivable. Toxic black smoke filled the club within 90 seconds, trapping dozens inside. The entire structure was swallowed by flames in under 15 minutes. Firefighters arrived within 4 minutes of the first 911 call, but it was too late. They pulled people from the wreckage, but many were already gone. When the smoke cleared, 100 were dead, with over 230 injured, many suffering from horrific burns, smoke inhalation, and severe trauma from being crushed in the panic. It stood as the 4th deadliest nightclub fire in American history. The aftermath was deeply devastating. Families crowded into hospitals, desperately looking for loved ones. The small, tight-knit Rhode Island community was utterly broken. With nowhere in the state more than an hour away, almost everyone knew a victim of the tragedy. Mourners held vigils, and memorials slowly filled the ground where the club once stood. As grief turned to anger, the world demanded accountability. How did this happen? And who was responsible? On February 26, 2003, Rhode Island Attorney General Patrick Lynch launched a grand jury investigation. Over the next few months, investigators gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and compiled expert testimony. On December 9, 2003, the grand jury officially indicted 3 individuals: Daniel Bellel, the tour manager who lit the pyrotechnics, and Jeffrey and Michael Darien, the owners of the station. Each faced 200 counts of involuntary manslaughter, including 100 for criminal negligence and 100 for a misdemeanor, resulting in death. The charges highlighted multiple critical failures. Bike had set off the pyrotechnics without any real permit or making sure the venue was actually safe. A massive dispute erupted over whether the club had even given him permission to use the fireworks. The Darians insisted they had a strict contract with the band that explicitly banned all pyrotechnics. These contracts are usually incredibly specific. Michael Darian later compared the pyrotechnic ban to a silly band rider, like demanding 12 brown M&Ms. But prosecutors kept their focus entirely on the foam. Lynch's investigation revealed that the polyurethane foam the Darians installed broke every local fire code and was basically solid gasoline. Once lit, it burned fast and pumped out highly toxic smoke. The owners claimed they ordered soundproofing material and never realized they had been sent highly flammable packing foam. Skeptics found that excuse very hard to swallow. Even worse, the building had no sprinkler system, a deadly loophole grandfathered in from when it was first built. Fire safety experts later testified that working sprinklers would have completely changed the outcome of that night. Another critical issue was the building's exits. Records showed that just 3 months before the tragedy, the Dardarians had been cited by the local fire marshal for a stage door that opened inward, violating safety codes. They were told to remove it, but on that horrific night, the door was still there, covered in foam and completely blocked by the fire. With that door in place, there is no question it increased the likelihood that many, many more would perish, Lynch stated. Dennis Lorak, the fire marshal who had inspected the club just months prior, did not face any criminal charges. State law shielded fire marshals from prosecution as long as their duties were performed in good faith. Lorak claimed he missed the foam during his November 2002 inspection because he was so distracted by the illegal stage door. Naturally, the Dardarians publicly questioned this. They publicly questioned why the fire marshal was allowed to make an honest mistake, while their own actions were treated as major, prosecutable crimes. Rather than risk a trial, all 3 men accepted plea deals. Daniel Belay pleaded guilty to 100 counts of misdemeanor manslaughter. He showed immense remorse, appearing completely broken by the sheer scale of the tragedy. Many grieving families actually supported leniency, convinced his remorse was genuine. Ultimately, he was sentenced to 4 years behind bars, with 11 suspended and 3 years of probation. He was released in 2008. Jeffrey and Michael Darian pleaded no contest to 100 counts of misdemeanor manslaughter, avoiding a trial. Unbelievably, the state let the brothers decide between themselves which one of them would go to prison. Michael Darian ended up with the same sentence as Belay, 4 years behind bars, earning release in 2009 after serving about 2 years and 9 months. Jeffrey Dardarian received a 10-year suspended sentence, 3 years of probation, and 500 hours of community service, avoiding prison altogether. Major civil lawsuits followed, eventually winning $176 million for the victims and their families. The state of Rhode Island and the town of West Warwick each paid $10 million for failing to inspect the venue properly. Owners Jeffrey and Michael Darian settled for $813,000. Sealed Air Corporation agreed to pay $25 million because their highly flammable foam had been installed in the drummer's alcove, where it released deadly toxic gases when it caught fire. Providence television station WPR1 and its then owners, Lenolin TV, settled for $30 million after their cameraman was accused of blocking exits while filming. The tragedy triggered sweeping changes to fire safety codes across the nation. Just weeks after the disaster, the National Fire Protection Association held an emergency meeting, passing several safety amendments on July 26, 2003. New regulations mandated sprinkler systems for any nightclub facility with a capacity over 100 people. They also required crowd managers at all assembly venues, restricted open festival seating, and forced regular exit inspections with detailed record keeping. Rhode Island went further, outlawing pyrotechnics in any venue holding fewer than 300 people, and demanding fire sprinklers in clubs holding over 150. In May 2017, the Station Fire Memorial Park opened on the very spot, honoring all 100 victims who died. Every February 20th, survivors, grieving families, and community members gather to remember those they lost. For so many, The emotional scars remain as raw today as they were that night. Linda Saran, who suffered major burns over 34% of her body, spent weeks in a coma and endured brutal rehabilitation. Even today, deep scars cover her body, serving as a constant reminder of that horrific blaze. She has openly stated she cannot forgive the Derderians, believing the owners have never fully accepted their own guilt. In October 2021, Jeffrey and Michael Derderian gave their first in-depth television interview on CBS's 48 Hours. The brothers claimed they wanted to clear the air and share new details, alleging that crucial evidence had actually been hidden from their defense team. The brothers maintained they knew nothing about the pyrotechnics, believing they had done everything possible to keep the club safe. Yet, for the families, no explanation will ever heal the pain. Their loved ones went out for a fun concert and never made it home. To this day, the station nightclub disaster remains one of the state's darkest tragedies. A lethal mix of highly flammable foam, overcrowding, locked exits, and a lack of sprinklers transformed a celebration into a horrific mass casualty event. The fire didn't just change Rhode Island, it forced the entire nation to rethink how it balances entertainment with basic public safety. For the 100 lives lost, and the 230 people left injured, and the countless families shattered, those deep scars will never fully fade. But as you and I are about to see, negligence is not the only threat. Pure political corruption can also rot a city from within. Case 5. Vincent Buddy Cianci Jr. Some politicians rise and fall only once, but Buddy Cianci did it twice. He wasn't just the mayor of Providence, Rhode Island. To many, he was Providence itself, charismatic, brash, and larger than life. Cianci held the office for an astonishing 21 years across 2 separate terms, becoming the longest-serving mayor in the city's history. To his supporters, he was a visionary who revitalized a decaying city, transforming Providence into a thriving cultural and economic hub. To his detractors, he was a corrupt politician who abused his power and betrayed the public. The truth, as always, with Buddy Cianci, was highly complicated. Born April 30th, 1941, Cianci grew up in an Italian-American home in nearby Cranston, Rhode Island. He went to Moses Brown School. He earned a bachelor's from Fairfield University and a law degree from Marquette, proving himself smart, ambitious, and highly savvy from a young age. By 1967, he served as an assistant attorney general for Rhode Island. In 1969, he was named special prosecutor for the state's elite anti-corruption strike force. In 1974, at just 33 years old, Cianci was elected mayor of Providence, the youngest and first Italian-American to hold the office. His political rise seemed unstoppable. As mayor, his first term focused entirely on urban renewal. In the 1970s, Providence was flatlining economically, choked by rampant crime and urban decay. Cianci championed redevelopment, improved city services, and courted business leaders. He brought crucial energy and optimism to a city that desperately needed both. By the late 1970s, the city was recovering, and Cianci's popularity reached new heights. Voters easily re-elected him in 1978 and 1982. He was sitting on top of the world, but Buddy Cianci possessed a volatile temper, and on March 20th, 1983, that anger cost him everything. It involved Raymond DeLeo, a local contractor, who was rumored to be having an affair with Cianci's estranged wife, Sheila. Once Cianci caught wind of the relationship, his anger consumed him entirely. That night, he lured DeLeo to his home, under false pretenses, confronting him inside. What followed next was brutal. Cianci, along with 2 other men later identified as reputed mob associate Anthony Street Laurent and patrol officer Dennis McParland, a detective assigned to the mayor's own security detail, proceeded to assault DeLeo. According to testimony, Cianci beat DeLeo with a heavy fireplace log, struck him with an ashtray, and tortured him with a lit cigarette. He even threatened to have DeLeo carried out in a body bag if the affair with Sheila didn't end immediately. The brutal beating dragged on for over an hour before DeLeo was finally released, bloody and broken. Rushing straight to the emergency room, and then the police, he filed charges for kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy. In January 1984, Cianci stood trial, facing absolutely devastating evidence. DeLeo testified in detail about the assault, which medical records clearly confirmed. The defense claimed the encounter was consensual, a hard story to believe, and on April 15, 1984, the jury convicted Cianci of assault. But the jury acquitted him of the heavier kidnapping and conspiracy charges. Superior Court Judge Thomas Fay handed down a 5-year prison sentence, suspending all but 1 year. Cianci also received 4 years of probation, resigning as mayor on April 25, 1984. But his story was far from over. Under Rhode Island law, his political career should have ended, but let's look closer at how he beat the system. But Cianci spotted a loophole. Because of how his suspended sentence was structured, his assault conviction was technically classified as a misdemeanor. After serving just 4 months behind bars, Cianci walked free and quickly landed a gig hosting a hit radio talk show. Keeping himself firmly in the spotlight, he launched a bold mayoral comeback campaign in 1990. Against all odds, he won. Returning to office in 1991, it initially seemed like he had genuinely learned his lesson. He threw his energy into rebuilding Providence, sparking an incredible citywide renaissance under his leadership. He pushed to relocate Interstate 95, exposing the buried Providence River and building the beautiful Waterplace Park. He backed the massive Providence Place Mall, lured in fresh businesses, and transformed the city into a magnet for tourists and creatives. Crime plunged, property values climbed, and Cianci's approval ratings went through the roof. Magazines and news stations nationwide celebrated him as the ultimate comeback mayor who rescued his city. But behind closed doors, corruption flourished, and we'll see how federal agents spent the 90s building their case. The FBI launched a sting operation, codenamed Plunder Dome. Their targets? Rampant bribery, extortion, and racketeering inside Cianci's administration. Wiretaps, tailing, and informants soon exposed a city hall where backroom political favors were bought and sold. Public contracts went to the highest kickback instead of the best bid, transforming the mayor's office into a criminal enterprise. On April 2, 2001, a federal grand jury indicted Cianci alongside several of his closest associates. They faced serious charges of racketeering conspiracy, extortion, witness tampering, and mail fraud. Prosecutors argued that Cianci ran a corrupt administration where city leases, public jobs, and lucrative contracts were routinely traded for cash bribes and campaign donations. One devastating accusation centered on a university club lease. Cianci allegedly demanded a $15,000 bribe to approve it, with the cash delivered in a cigar box straight to his home. Cianci denied everything, claiming he was being unfairly targeted by federal prosecutors playing dirty political games. He insisted the case relied on lies from convicted felons and bitter former employees looking for lighter sentences. Yet, the evidence kept piling up. Witnesses detailed secret payoffs, backroom deals, and a toxic culture of greed that completely infected City Hall. Wiretaps captured conversations of dirty money changing hands to push through city decisions. Starting in February 2002, you and I can see how this 5-month trial became the state's biggest scandal. Prosecutors brought forward dozens of witnesses and thousands of pages of incriminating records. The defense countered that while some associates were indeed corrupt, the mayor was completely in the dark about their actions. On June 25, 2002, the jury delivered a split verdict. Cianci beat 26 charges, including bribery and extortion, but he was convicted on a single count of racketeering conspiracy. On September 6, 2002, U.S. District Judge Ernest Torres sentenced Buddy Cianci to 5 years and 4 months in federal prison, plus 3 years of supervised release. The former mayor was also ordered to pay fines and restitution. On December 7, 2002, Cianci surrendered to authorities to serve his sentence at Fort Dix, New Jersey. His political run was finally over. After serving 4.5 years, Cianci was finally released in May 2007. Returning to Rhode Island, he stepped back into broadcasting, hosting a radio show on WPRO. He published a memoir, Politics and Pasta, looking back at his wild, chaotic career. Despite a criminal record, Cianci remained a beloved figure to residents who credited him with transforming Providence. In 2014, he launched another mayoral run, a campaign that quickly drew intense national attention. Could Buddy Cianci, twice disgraced, actually win a third time? He could not. In November 2014, Cianci lost to Democrat Jorge Elorza, closing the final chapter on his political career. On January 28, 2016. Vincent Buddy Ciani Jr. died of colon cancer at 74. Thousands attended his funeral. Flags across Providence flew at half-staff as tributes poured in from allies and enemies alike, love him or hate him. Buddy had been a powerhouse in Rhode Island politics for over 40 years, leaving behind a deeply contested legacy. Supporters pointed to the Providence Renaissance, a vibrant arts scene, and a completely revitalized downtown. But critics pointed to the corruption, the abuse of power, and his betrayal of public trust. Ciani once famously remarked, "I never met a legal dollar I didn't like," delivered with trademark humor. That line captured his complicated life. A leader who could charm, inspire, and infuriate all at once. Buddy Ciani's life is a classic American story of ambition, redemption, and deep moral compromise. He climbed higher than almost any politician in the state's history, and he fell twice as hard. Yet, even in disgrace, he remained deeply fascinating. A reminder that in politics, heroes and villains are rarely easy to define. While Ciani's crimes stemmed from dirty political corruption, the state's next case centered on a crime so public and violent, it forced Rhode Island to confront capital punishment head-on. Case 6, Jason Pooh. A single gunshot changes everything. September 20th, 2010 started like any other morning for David Main. The 49-year-old manager of a BP station in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, was finishing his routine shift duties. After counting the day's cash, he packed $12,542 into a deposit bag, ready to drive to Citizens Bank on Diamond Hill Road. He had made this exact drive dozens of times before, but on this morning, a predator was watching. Someone was waiting. And within minutes, David Main would fall victim to one of the state's most brutal armed robberies. The heinous crime would spark a constitutional crisis over the death penalty, deeply dividing the state's highest officials. Jason Wayne P.L. was 35, a career criminal who visited Kelly's Sporting Goods in Cranston just a day before the robbery. His record stretched back to the 1990s. Multiple violent robberies, failed heists, and severe assaults had already cost him years behind bars. In March 2000, while incarcerated, Pooh brutally attacked a guard, earning him an additional 20-year sentence. He was released on parole just months before the ambush, a decision that would prove absolutely catastrophic. On September 19th, PL met his accomplices, including 36-year-old Jose Santiago from Springfield, Massachusetts, who acted as the getaway driver, and 35-year-old Kelly Marie Lahoa, also from Springfield, who served as lookout. Together, they cased the BP station, studying David Main's movements and the exact timing of his daily bank deposit. On the morning of September 20th, the trio arrived early. Laho kept watch near the gas station, waiting for the moment Main would step outside. Santiago sat behind the wheel of their getaway car, the engine idling, ready to bolt. Pooh hid near the bank entrance, close enough to strike. Just after 9 a.m., Main exited the station holding the cash bag. He drove the short distance to Citizens Bank and slowly pulled into the parking lot. As Main stepped out and approached the doors, Pooh lunged from the shadows. The entire horror was captured on security cameras and seen by bystanders. Pooh pulled a gun and confronted Main, demanding the cash bag. A terrified Main tried to hand it over, but compliance meant nothing. PL wanted no witnesses and no delays. He fired multiple shots at point-blank range, striking Main in the back and head. Main collapsed onto the pavement right outside the bank entrance. Pooh snatched the cash bag and sprinted to the getaway car. Santiago sped away from the bloodbath. Within moments, David Main was dead, his life stolen for $12,542. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but there was absolutely nothing they could do. A devoted husband, father figure to many, and dedicated employee was gone in an instant, taken by sheer greed and senseless violence. The Woonsocket Police Department, Rhode Island State Police, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately launched a massive joint manhunt. Eyewitnesses provided clear descriptions of the shooter and the getaway car. Security footage captured Plough's movements in chilling detail. Within days, investigators identified him as the ruthless shooter. They tracked down Santiago and Lajoie shortly after. On November 16, 2010, federal agents arrested all three. Because the crime happened outside a bank and affected interstate commerce, prosecutors determined it fell under federal jurisdiction. And under federal law, Plow's deadly actions qualified him for the death penalty. But Rhode Island had outlawed capital punishment in 1842, becoming the very first state to ban it for all crimes. This fierce opposition to the death penalty was deeply woven into the state's long history and core values. When the United States Attorney's Office filed federal charges against Plow and announced they would seek a death sentence, Governor Lincoln Chafee, a staunch opponent of capital punishment, found himself facing a massive political dilemma. Rhode Island law required the governor's personal sign-off before any state prisoner could be moved to federal custody. Chafee refused. He publicly declared that he would never hand Plow over to federal agents if it meant exposing him to execution. Chafee firmly believed capital punishment was morally wrong and entirely inconsistent with the state's progressive values. Instead, he proposed that local prosecutors try Plow on state murder charges, accepting a guilty plea in exchange for life in prison without parole. Plow, desperate to avoid the federal death penalty, readily agreed to this state deal. But federal prosecutors led by United States Attorney Peter Nerona refused to back down. They argued the governor lacked any authority to block a federal trial for Plow's heinous crime, which occurred at a federally insured bank and fell directly under federal jurisdiction. The Department of Justice filed a motion with the First Circuit Court of Appeals to force Rhode Island to surrender Plow. The legal battle soon became national news, framing the dispute as a clash between state sovereignty and federal power, pitting moral beliefs against the ultimate pursuit of justice for a slain man. On August 25, 2011, the First Circuit Court of Appeals ruled 3-2 in favor of the federal government. The court declared that federal prosecutors had full authority to try Plow, and Rhode Island could not block his transfer. The ruling sparked immense controversy, dividing legal scholars and local citizens. Chafee appealed, but on November 7, 2011, the Supreme Court declined the case, letting the ruling stand. Rhode Island was now legally forced to hand over Plow. By this time, however, political tides and public opinion had shifted. Media reports focused heavily on the brutal nature of the murder and the suffering of David Maine's family. Sensing the growing controversy, federal prosecutors quietly began rethinking their courtroom strategy. In July 2013, the United States Department of Justice announced a shocking shift, withdrawing its pursuit of the death penalty. Plow would be permitted to plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence with absolutely no chance of parole. On July 31, 2013, Plow stood in United States District Court in Providence to plead guilty to conspiracy, federal Hobbs Act robbery, and carrying, brandishing, and discharging a firearm during a federal crime of violence that ultimately resulted in David Maine's death. At the final sentencing hearing on October 24, 2013, devastated members of David Maine's family directly addressed the court. They described a hard-working family man taken from them in an instant, leaving behind a profound void that could never be filled. Prosecutors highlighted the cold, calculated nature of the heist, the careful planning, and a chilling willingness to murder for quick cash. Plow offered no real defense. On that day, United States District Judge William Smith sentenced him to life in federal prison, with zero chance of parole. Jose Santiago, the getaway driver, pleaded guilty on September 5, 2013, to the same charges. In February 2014, he received 40 years in prison, followed by 5 years of supervision. Kelly Marie LaJoy, the lookout, entered her guilty plea on December 9, 2011, to conspiracy, aiding and abetting robbery, and using a firearm during a violent crime. On February 19, 2014, she was sentenced to 15.5 years in federal prison. All 3 defendants remain behind bars today. The PLO case reshaped the legal debate on federalism and capital punishment. It proved state authority had limits when federal law stepped in. The case also highlighted the deep moral complexities of the death penalty, exposing how deeply held values conflict with rigid legal structures. For Governor Chafee, this high-stakes case was both a personal and political ordeal. The governor clung to his principles, even as public anger began to mount. For David Maine's grieving family, no courtroom verdict could ever restore what had been stolen from them. Yet, they found comfort knowing that PL would never walk free again. In November 2018, Jason PL was transferred from Rhode Island State Prison to continue his life sentence inside a federal facility. Today, the case remains a dark milestone in Rhode Island's modern legal history, proving that even in a state without the death penalty, heinous crimes demand ultimate accountability. But while Rhode Island dealt with the fallout of that battle, another dark tale was quietly unfolding. This new mystery would expose the deep roots of organized crime in the state. Case 7, Frank Salem and Robert Duca. Some dark secrets stay buried for decades until they don't. On March 31st, 2016, FBI agents descended on a decaying mill building on Branch Avenue in Providence's Wannock neighborhood. This was no routine inspection. They were acting on a tip from an unexpected informant, a landlord facing major legal trouble of his own. Shovels tore into the earth behind the building. Within hours, they struck something that would solve one of New England's oldest mafia cold cases, human remains. After 23 long years, Stephen Darrow had finally been found. Darrow was 43 years old when he vanished in May 1993. As a Providence lawyer and businessman, he ran The Channel, a massive rock club in South Boston that packed in crowds every single night. But the nightclub harbored a deadly secret: two silent partners with deep ties to the mob. Francis, known as Cadillac Frank Salem, the boss of the Patriarca family, and his son, Frank Jr., had secret financial interests in the business. When federal agents started sniffing around, Darrow became a dangerous liability. He knew too much. In the ruthless world of La Cosa Nostra, knowing too much is a swift death sentence. Court testimony later revealed that Darrow was lured to Salem's home in Sharon, Massachusetts on May 10, 1993, under the guise of a regular business meeting. Once inside, the trap was instantly sprung. Frank Salem Jr. allegedly strangled Darrow with a garrote wire while associate Paul Weddick pinned his legs. The elder Salem watched, overseeing the cold-blooded execution. It was cold, calculated, and brutal. With Darrow dead, the mob needed to make the body vanish. That is where Bobby Duca entered the picture. Duca, a high-ranking capo in the Patriarca syndicate, stepped in to handle the cleanup. He and his brother Joseph transported Darrow's body from Massachusetts back to Providence, burying him behind a rundown mill owned by a mob associate named William Reich. The grave was shallow, a quiet spot, chosen specifically for its isolation. For over 20 years, the silence held. Darrow's family kept searching and hoping, but the mafia's strict code of omerta seemed absolutely unbreakable. Then, in 2015, everything unraveled. William Reich, who owned the mill, was busted on unrelated drugs and weapons charges. Staring down a massive prison sentence, he did the unthinkable for an old-school mob associate. He flipped. Reich confessed to investigators about the body on his property, a secret he had kept since 1993. The FBI verified his story, and the dig began. Once the skeleton was exhumed, dental records confirmed it was Darrow. The cold case was suddenly red-hot. Focus immediately shifted to Frank Salem. By 2016, the 83-year-old was living quietly in Atlanta under witness protection. Years earlier, after a 1999 racketeering conviction, Salem had flipped, testifying against corrupt FB1 agents and rival mobsters. He testified, took a plea deal, and slipped into comfortable anonymity, but he never mentioned Darrow. The moment he realized investigators were closing in, Salem bolted. Within days, marshals caught him in Connecticut, charging the old boss with witness elimination, a heavy federal charge that carried the death penalty. Meanwhile, Bobby Duca's situation was just as messy. He had also cooperated with the government after his 2011 arrest, signing a plea deal to spill everything he knew about the mob. In exchange for his secrets, he was sentenced to just a single day in prison, marked as time served. But just like Salem, he kept lying about Darrow. When confronted with new evidence in 2016, federal prosecutors charged him with obstruction and lying. Duca had shattered the plea deal, keeping him out of prison. His trial began in June 2018 in Boston federal court. Prosecutors built a devastating case using powerful witness testimony, forensic evidence, and a decades-long cover-up. The star witness was Stephen the Rifleman Flemmi, Salem's former best friend. Flemmi, a hitman serving life in prison, took the stand to testify that he witnessed the murder. He detailed how Frank Salem Jr. strangled Darrow while Weddick pinned him and Salem Sr. watched. Other evidence backed up Flemmi's claims, including statements from cooperating witnesses and the location of the physical remains. Salem's defense team fought back, claiming Flemmi was lying to get revenge or a shorter sentence. They pointed out that Salem had already confessed to several other crimes while cooperating with the feds. Why would he hide this one? But prosecutors countered that Darrow's murder was a different story. It involved Salem's own son, and admitting the truth meant sending his own blood to prison. Frank Salem Jr. had already died in 1995, never facing a single charge. By lying, Salem Sr. shielded his son's name. On June 22, 2018, the jury found him guilty. Both Salem and his co-defendant, Paul Weddick, were convicted of killing a federal witness. On September 13, 2018, a federal judge sentenced both men to life behind bars with no hope of parole. 85-year-old Salem was transferred to a secure medical center in Missouri. He filed several appeals, but all were rejected. On December 13, 2022, Cadillac Frank Salem died in prison at 89. His death marked the end of an era. The last old-school New England godfather, destroyed not by rival gangs, but by his own lies. Robert Duca faced his own grim reckoning. Charged with lying to the feds, he pleaded guilty and received an extended prison sentence. Once prized by prosecutors, his cooperation was now completely ruined by his lies. To save his own skin, he betrayed the mob, only to destroy his credibility by hiding the truth about Darrow. The verdict brought some peace to Darrow's family, though the agony of their loss never truly faded away. His son, Nick Darrow, spoke out after Salem died, saying simply, "The world is better off without him. Good riddance." It became a textbook example of how even the strongest crime families eventually collapse under the weight of their secrets. The silence of La Cosa Nostra was shattered forever by informants, turncoats, and the relentless pursuit of justice. This entire case proved just how far law enforcement will go to crack decades-old cold cases, from a gangster deciding to cooperate to digging up a decades-old secret grave and seeing ruthless mobsters turn on their own family. It's proof that in this modern world, no secret stays buried forever. Today, we see that while organized crime still exists in New England, it operates only as a weak shadow of its former self. But as that generation of gangsters faded, a new danger was quietly rising in Rhode Island's underworld, led by a man whose nickname terrified everyone around him. Let's look at Case 8, Adam Emery. Some mysteries are never solved. Some vanishings leave only questions. On November 10, 1993, Adam Emery celebrated his 31st birthday in the worst way imaginable. He was found guilty of second-degree murder for a tragedy committed 3 years earlier on August 31, 1990. His life had taken a dark, catastrophic turn. That night, Emery, his wife Elena, and friends were eating seafood in Rhode Island when a car sideswiped his 1985 Ford Thunderbird and sped away. Fuming, Emery chased them. His wife pointed out a red Ford LTD driven by 20-year-old Jason Bass, convinced it was the offending car. It wasn't, but before Emery realized his fatal mistake, it was too late. He forced Bass to pull over. He got out of his car, holding a military knife his wife had handed him, to confront the terrified driver. Bass, riding with his cousin Josh and a friend, had no idea why they were being chased. He threw his car in reverse to escape. That was when Emery struck, plunging the blade deep into Bass's chest, piercing his heart. Bass was declared dead at Rhode Island Hospital shortly after. Let's consider how investigators soon proved Bass's car was never involved in the crash. Emery had taken an innocent life over a tragic case of mistaken identity. Emery was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. His family posted a $270,000 bail. He spent 3 years awaiting trial. During that time, he worked, stayed out of trouble, and attended every court date. At trial, he claimed self-defense, insisting Bass was the aggressor. But the evidence pointed elsewhere to an unarmed young man, trapped and terrified, killed by a man consumed by road rage on November 10, 1993. The jury found Emery guilty. He faced life in prison. His sentencing was scheduled for 1 month later, but Adam Emery never made it to court. Superior Court Judge Linda Savage made a highly controversial decision, allowing Emery to remain free on bail until his sentencing. Hours after the verdict, Emery and Elena walked out of the courthouse. Witnesses saw them whispering. A lip reader, hired by state police, studied courtroom footage and concluded Elena told her husband, "We will do what we originally said. You promised me. We should have done this before." What did that promise refer to? That question would haunt investigators for decades. At 3:35 p.m., the couple arrived at a sporting goods store in Cranston. They bought athletic socks, sweatsuits, and 80 pounds of wearable weights. The cashier later recalled that Elena was talkative and smiling throughout, while Adam seemed surprised by the total cost. Why would someone planning to end their life care about the cost? Next, they were spotted eating at a fast food restaurant, looking calm and perfectly ordinary. Around 4:45 p.m., witnesses saw them walking along the Claiborne-Pell-Newport Bridge, which towers over Narragansett Bay at over 200 feet. They were seen driving away from the bridge, but at 6:53 p.m., a call came in about an abandoned vehicle. Police responded and found the Emery's Toyota Camry idling with the keys in the ignition, headlights on, and engine running. Inside lay folded clothes on the back seat, shredded credit cards and cash on the front, and Adam's driver's license. It looked like a carefully staged scene suggesting a double suicide. But where were the bodies? An intense search of Narragansett Bay began immediately. Divers, sonar, and helicopters scoured the water for days. They found nothing. The Bass family, still grieving Jason, now feared that Emery had successfully escaped justice. Nearly 9 months later, in July 1994, a commercial fisherman hauled up his net and discovered human leg bones tangled in the mesh. Clinging to one bone was a scrap of sock, identical to the ones the Emerys bought the day they vanished. Then on August 30th, 1994, Elena's skull was pulled from the bay. Marine biologists determined the bones had not been submerged for 9 months. This meant they were placed in the water much later, or had been preserved somewhere else first. DNA testing confirmed the remains belonged to Elena Emery, but Adam was nowhere to be found. Finding Elena's remains only deepened the mystery. Did they both jump, but only her body surfaced? Did Adam convince Elena to end her life while he ran, or did he push her off that bridge? The evidence is frustratingly unclear, leading us to several dark theories. Some believe they both died in a suicide pact, and ocean currents simply carried Adam's remains out to sea. Others suspected Adam manipulated Elena into a fake suicide, knowing her body would eventually be found to make it look like he died too. In 2004, a Rhode Island judge declared Adam Emery legally dead, but the FBI never closed the case. In 2010, they put Emery on their wanted fugitives list, signaling they believed he might still be alive. Over the years, rumored sightings popped up in Italy, South America, and various United States cities. None were ever confirmed. The Bass family remains convinced Adam orchestrated a massive escape. Joshua Post, Jason's cousin, who was in the car that night, stated publicly, "It is easier to hide with one person than with two." He believed Adam either killed Elena or let her die alone to vanish without a partner slowing him down. Former Rhode Island State Police Lieutenant Kevin Hopkins, who investigated the case extensively, remains deeply uncertain. "I have seen a lot of things in my career," he said in interviews. "I wouldn't put it past him that maybe he is still alive. Who knows?" Yet Hopkins ultimately believes Emery died that night. "If I had to give you my honest opinion, I would say he was deceased." Investigators never found